Today, a workshop about Azure Infrastructure as Code using Azure Bicep. I'm just kind of curious who's worked with Azure before? Most people, something, okay, cool. And who's worked with Bicep before?
No.
Nobody, okay, cool. Well, today we have a presentation, some information first, and then there's also a hands-on part where you can flex your muscles with Azure Bicep. And I've designed the workshop in such a way that there's a little bit for everyone. So if you've never used Azure or never used Bicep, there are some things you can learn. But also if you regularly use Azure or even regularly use Bicep, there will be something to learn in there. So I kind of made it for something for everyone. So hopefully you will join me in the workshop as well. Yeah. First, a little bit about myself. So my name is Jeroen Vrijkorte. I work for the company Postuma Partners in Gouda. I'm an Azure and .NET specialist, and I live in Gouda, which is where this beautiful city council building is. And my hobbies are piano playing, guitar playing, and when I'm drunk enough, I also sing. Not always, not always. Infrastructure as code. That is a technique where you create and maintain your cloud resources using code files. So instead of creating everything by hand through a portal or whatever, you write code files that contain the definition of your infrastructure. And infrastructure, that resources could be things like virtual networks or virtual machines, storage accounts, maybe databases, whatever you need for your application to run. And the idea behind infrastructure as code typically is the use of a declarative approach. So you declare, I want this resource, and that resource, and the tooling has to take care of making it happen. So you don't have to write scripts to create resources, but you declare what you want to have, what you want the end result to look like. That is often the approach that is used with infrastructure as code. And well, why would you want to do that? Well, one of the obvious advantages is that if you declare this in code files, you can easily deploy copies of your application. So if you have different environments, for example, a test environment, maybe an acceptance environment and a production environment, you can easily deploy identical or nearly identical copies to those environments. And the other use case would be if you have the same application, but you create different environments for each customer of the application. Sometimes that is something that you want. That's also then easy to achieve when you have your infrastructure as code files, so you don't have to do all kinds of manual steps to create a new environment. So that's very useful. And it also allows the infrastructure, the way you configure your resources, to be version controlled. So you can store your resources along with the source code of your application in Git or in some other version control system. So you can easily see what was changed by whom and hopefully for what reason. So it also adds a lot of traceability to your workflow. It's often useful to make a distinction between two types of infrastructure for which you can write code. And I often make the distinction in this way. You have foundational infrastructure, which is infrastructure that can be used by multiple applications. You don't always want that. Sometimes you just want each application to be standalone. But sometimes maybe for cost savings or for compliance reasons or other reasons, you may want to share certain resources with different applications. For example, maybe a database server would be shared. In those cases, you would want to keep the code files separate in some kind of infrastructure or shared repository. And separate from that, you have the resources that are for a specific application. Those are the resources that you would more often duplicate. And those you can store directly with the source code of your application. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Good.
Do we have integration with the CI/CD as well for this Bicep? Because we are referring provisioning all the infrastructure through the Bicep, right? So do we need to execute them by manually, or we can even integrate it with CI/CD?
Yeah, so the question is, can we integrate it with CACD?
CICD?
CICD. Oh, what you're working. Yeah. Yes, I understand what you mean. So if you can integrate it with some kind of pipeline, build pipeline.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And which is also highly recommended. Yeah. So that's definitely possible. I won't really go into that in this training because I just want you to experiment with Bicep and see what it can do. But yes, you would normally integrate this in your build chain. Yeah. Thank you for that question. It's a good addition. Up to now I just talked about infrastructure as code in general. Now I want to zoom in, well, what's possible in the Azure platform. There's basically two ways out of the box that Azure supports. There's the old way and the new way. The old way is called ARM templates. It stands for Azure Resource Manager templates. They've been around forever, I think for as long as Azure has been there, probably, or more or less. And they are JSON files. And you can actually export these files from the Azure portal, which is something that I can also demonstrate. So when you go to, let's see, to the Azure portal. Oh, excuse me, I'm going to go to the portal, but in a different browser.
You have
To close.
drag it to the...
Yeah, just a moment. That's good that you say that. No. It doesn't want to move to the other window. Move to that side. Right. Is that? But now I can't see it myself. Never mind. Where's my mouse? Yeah, so that is. Then I just have to look over here. So I have here just some kind of resource group. You can probably not hear me very well this way. Yeah. So when you have a resource group, I suppose you maybe have sometimes seen the Azure portal before. Then you can, with any resource in Azure, you can, in the left bar, go to, where is it? Automation, and then export template. And if you do that, it's going to think for a few seconds, hopefully not that long. You can see it's generating a template, which gives me time for a riddle. So, what do you call a line of guys waiting for a haircut? It's a barbecue. I'm sorry. It's still not done. So I was hoping one joke would be enough.
I want to hear more.
You want to hear more? Yeah, I have more jokes.
Okay.
But I don't want to spend them all for this thing. But that was the only one I could actually remember. All right, there we go. Still generating? So, 3 men were waiting in line to enter heaven. And the angel at the gate asks the first man, "How many times did you cheat on your wife?" And the man says, 10 times. So the angel gives him the keys to a Toyota. So he gets, this is how you get to drive around in heaven. You have to do it with a Toyota. And then the second man says he cheated his wife only 5 times. And the angel gives him a Lexus. So he gets to drive a Lexus. And then the third man says, "Well, I never cheated on my wife." And he gets a Rolls Royce. So he gets to drive around in a Rolls Royce in heaven. And then a few days later, the 3 men meet. But the man in the Rolls Royce is very sad. And the other man asks him, "So what's wrong? Why are you so sad?" And then he said, "Well, I just saw my wife riding around in a scooter." It's done. It's done. Right, so this is what an ARM template looks like. You have, basically one giant JSON file. So you can see it's pretty, it's really difficult to mouse this way. I have to do it like this. Where is my mouse? There. So it's quite long. And you have all these things like, well, concat, so they're basically functions inside the JSON. And as you can see, it's pretty long, but you can create it in the Azure portal. You can export it, and you can also use this to deploy a copy of this resource group in this case. So it would contain various resources. Let's go back to the presentation. Is it Control F5, Shift F5? Wow, it works. It's amazing. So that are our ARM templates, and well, the good thing about them is they usually work, and you can do quite a lot of things with them actually. So it's not always obvious, but it has a fairly rich syntax where you can put all kinds of functions inside there to combine things. You can use parameters. So there are quite a few options. It's quite powerful. But the downside is you're programming in JSON, and well, JSON was never designed for programming things in it. It's not very. Sorry?
Not readable at all if it is.
No, it's not quite readable. Exactly. So the JSON files are not always very readable unless they are very simple. So they can be quite difficult to read and write. I put one example up here, which is something you can do with an ARM template, but it's quite difficult to figure out what's happening here. So it's not ideal. And this is why Microsoft designed Azure Bicep, which is an alternative to ARM templates, but with a cleaner syntax. That's basically it's in a shortcut. And just as comparison, on the left side you see an ARM template, and on the right side the equivalent Bicep file. Both of them deploy exactly the same thing, a virtual network with a few subnets. And you can see the Bicep file is more than 50% shorter. But also the syntax is a lot cleaner. So in the JSON you have all these many quotes around all the properties, and you have all these commas everywhere, and they are not there in Bicep.
It's like TypeScript.
Yeah, I guess it looks a bit like TypeScript. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I agree. JavaScript, yeah, it's basically the same language. Yeah. So it's a lot cleaner than this. Easier to write. You don't have all these commas at the end. You can just omit them. And you don't have all these quotation marks. Even better, you also get a lot of IntelliSense support, which is something that I will show a little bit later. First, a little bit about the comparison, or what the relationship is between these two things. Bicep is a language, it's a domain-specific declarative language, actually, which compiles to one or more ARM templates, well, usually one ARM template, actually. So each Bicep file you compile to one ARM template. And if you want, there's also the option to decompile an ARM template to a Bicep file. I rarely use this, but it is possible. I don't think it has 100% support for everything, but you can use it if you have existing ARM files, for example, because you exported them from the Azure portal. You can decompile them to a Bicep file. I have to say, if you decompile them, then usually it needs some work to become readable. The decompile is not always ideal. But you also have, you can compile every Bicep file to ARM and then deploy the ARM file. That's one approach you can use. But you can also omit the ARM file entirely and deploy directly from the Bicep file. That's also a flow that's supported. It's often more convenient. And then a little bit about Bicep as a language. So it is a declarative language, and that can take some getting used to if you're always working in an imperative language like JavaScript or Java or Python or .NET. Because then you're used that your program starts at the top and then it does all kinds of things and does all these statements. Well, Bicep as a language, it does not have any statements. You are declaring the resources that you want to have in Azure. So it also does not matter in which order they appear. The tooling will figure out in which order the resources need to be deployed. So usually you don't have to declare it in the Bicep file. Sometimes it is necessary to declare the order, but in any case, it's not done by the order in the file. You have to specify this resource depends on that other one, but the order is immaterial. And it's also not possible to write statements in Bicep files. So that can sometimes be a little bit confusing. If I go back to this example, for example, at the top, you see you have these two variables, address prefix and subnet prefix. Well, if this were an imperative language, you would expect that at some point I can assign a different value to that variable, but that's not possible in Bicep. So basically that subnet prefix is just another word for what's standing on the right-hand side of the equal sign. So they are actually more like evaluated constants than variables.
Yeah, it's weird that they choose for instead of constant.
Yeah, indeed. That is a little bit of a strange choice, maybe. So that is where sometimes in Bicep you can get a little bit confused because it has the appearance of JavaScript, like something that maybe starts there and then it does all these control flow things. Because you also have an if and a for. It's control flow, but not really control flow. So I'm going to show that a little bit later how that works. But if you read it as if it is a regular programming language, you can get a little bit confused. This is why I'm mentioning it specifically.
This parameter is something that you set from outside?
The parameters at the top. Yeah, that's right. You can, for example, pass them on the command line. So the question was about these parameters at the top. It's at deployment time you can either pass in a file that contains the parameter values, or at the command line you can specify this parameter should get this value, and you can also code a default value in the Bicep file itself. So these are both optional parameters because they have a value in the Bicep file itself.
So what types do they have for parameters? I see string there, but do they also have like Boolean or?
Yes, there are various parameter types. So the question was, do all the parameters have to be strings? No, there are many different types. I think you have a string, a Boolean, some kind of number. I'm not entirely sure if it's a double, some kind of number type. You also have array types, but I'm not sure if they can also be parameters. I don't know. You can use them in other parts of the Bicep. If you can pass them as parameters, maybe. That I'm not entirely sure.
Is there any way to compile this file? Like any compilation errors or?
Yes, there is a Bicep compiler which compiles it to an ARM file. And
do we have IDE support, or do we need to upload into Azure platform?
We also have IDE support, which is something I'm going to show in a second.
Okay.
But good question. Everything clear so far?
Yeah. Sure.
Good. This one, yeah, so everything in Bicep is an expression. That's something to remember. It's never a statement. Like a statement is something that has some kind of effect. That does not exist in Bicep. You only have things that express how you want your deployed resource to look. That's basically what you specify in Bicep. And I'm going to show some of that, so then it will probably also become a little bit more clear what I mean with that. And to work with, I just lost my mouse. Is it there? Oh, it's there. I can close this one. To work with Bicep, personally, I usually use Visual Studio Code. So you can run that on any platform. It's also possible to use Visual Studio and probably many other editors. But at least for the workshop, Visual Studio Code is probably the easiest. So I'm going to use that. And within Visual Studio Code, you can install an extension that you can do here. I have already installed it. It's called the Bicep. So you can search here for Bicep, and then it shows this extension. And if you install that, oh, thank you. Yes, thanks about that. Yeah. So I need to stand more like this. So if you click this button, you can search extensions, and if you then search Bicep, and this one shows up, and you install that, then you have support for the Bicep language in your editor. I'm going to turn this whole thing around. So now I can also see you a little bit. Yeah, oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so, yeah, where is my mouse? It's here. Yeah. So we're going to make a new file. Yeah. New file. So, Eonics. And no, not .demo. Except that .bicep. So we'll create that thing, and I did that before. I can remove those. No, I will make a new folder. I have too many stuff here. New folder.
You need to change the name of the file.
Oh, thank you. It doesn't matter too much, but.
Next thing you're going to look for it and not find it.
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. So now we have a new bicep file in Visual Studio Code, and it's actually quite handy in this editor to write a bicep file. So you just type the rest from resource, and you can see it automatically completes. And these are all, well, sort of snippets that you can use. I'm going to start just with a simple resource statement. And if I type a space, then I can just continue typing. I want something with a website. I was hoping it would complete. Right, I just have to type a quote. And in this case, I'm going to deploy a website in Azure, an Azure App Services website. And yeah, you have to know these resource names, but I happen to know that it's this one, Microsoft.web/sites. And if you then press Tab, it will complete that part. And then you get to choose the API version that you want to use. So, well, I think we can use this version. And then if you just press space, it already gives more suggestions, like the things you could type. So yeah, an is statement that could be, or is sign could be nice. Then I type another space, and it automatically focuses this required properties snippet, which is quite useful. So we use that. If I type enter, you see it's automatically building the structure. I need to give a name to this web application. Eonics. The name has to be unique within all of Azure. So hopefully this will be unique. I'm not sure, but we'll see. And I have to give a location. And as location, we will use West Europe. You can use that during the workshop as well. West Europe just means the Netherlands. So it's easy in Azure. And you see it gives a few squiggly lines here and there. So we can first see this one. It's actually a warning. So what's the problem here? A resource location should not use a hard-coded string or variable value. Please use a parameter. So it's already trying to be clever. It says, yeah, you shouldn't hard-code this. It's better to be a parameter. So, yeah, I agree with that. So you can do, you can use that light bulb icon, or I usually do control followed by a dot. And then you get this menu, and you can say create new parameter with default value. And then it creates a parameter also with a description. So that's really nice. I don't have to type that by hand. And yeah, here I also made a mistake. Expected a resource identifier at this location. So that's my bad. You need to give everything in Bicep a symbolic name, which you can use to reference in the rest of your Bicep file. So I can call this thing web app, for example. So that's a symbolic name for this resource.
This API version, that at the end, does it determine the parameters that you can fill in, or what is?
Yeah, I think it indeed determines the parameters you can fill in, and it also determines the API that is called in the backend when you actually deploy this thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think for certain properties you would have to use a certain API version because they will be fairly recent. I haven't encountered this myself yet. So far I haven't ever had to change it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think new features would typically be added to the new API, and I'm not sure if Microsoft adds new things to old APIs, probably not. So just pick the one that works for you, I'd say.
The API is like the declaration in Bicep API.
You mean this date right here, right?
Yeah. You say it's an API, but it's likely doesn't have anything to do with your deployed website.
True. This is the API for the deployment itself.
Right,
Yeah, good question. It does not affect your application at all.
Yeah, then
It's only the API. Oh, that's my phone. I don't want to call anyone right now.
Are your APIs always backward compatible with old APIs? Do they deprecate things?
Well, not a lot. Are they backwards compatible? So if you take a Bicep file and you just update the API version, you mean? I think it may break, because otherwise there's not really a reason to support all these API versions.
yeah, maybe there's a new required parameter or something.
Yeah, I think that you should expect some breakage if you want to upgrade to a new API version. But you can see they support the old ones quite a long time. You can go back all the way to 2015. So if you now choose 2022 API, it will last for a long time. But good question. And now I've made a valid Bicep file, so let's deploy this thing. And to deploy it, you can actually deploy it from Visual Studio Code itself. That requires installing another extension for some reason. I didn't want to install another extension, so I'm going to deploy it using the Azure CLI, which I personally also find more convenient. Use whatever you want. So the Azure CLI is something that you will need to install, and if you have installed the Azure CLI, then if you open a command prompt in Windows, you can use the AC command.
It's not on your screen.
Oh, yes, thank you. I keep forgetting that you see something else than I see.
You can also open a terminal one in Visual Studio Code.
Sorry?
You can also open up a terminal with Visual Studio Code.
Oh, yeah, I could have done that as well. Yeah, I did it this way. Yeah, so the first thing you have to do, for AZ as well, if you want to do Bicep deployments, you need to install the Bicep extension for Azure CLI. If I remember correctly, it would be this way: AC install, or no, I think it's AC Bicep install. Oh. Something went wrong here. AC Bicep install. Well, yeah, I already have it installed, so it returns immediately. But if you then have it installed, we can actually deploy something, and the syntax for that is AC deployment group. This group is maybe a little bit odd. What this means is you have different types of deployment in Azure. You can do a subscription deployment or a group deployment. And I think there's even one more, but I don't remember entirely. But in this case, we are going to do a group deployment, which means you need to have an existing resource group, and then you can deploy something into that resource group. So now that I'm telling this, I realize that I forgot something. I need to create a resource group. I haven't done that yet. So we can say group create, -n gives the name of the resource group. What do we have? Eonics Hack Night. And you can do -l, that's for the location. So we say West Europe, and then it should create a resource group. So it has created a resource group. And then we do the other command, deployment group, and create, because a deployment is something that you create in Azure, and it also lives in the Azure platform after you have deployed something. I have to specify the group to which I want to deploy, which is the Eonics Hack Night group. And I have to specify the Bicep file. You can do that this way, -- template file, and then the name of my file. Where did I put it? I put it in the Eonics Hack Night folder, right? I don't remember where I put it.
Click the top left.
The top left.
Files. At Motion extensions, code files.
I can see it here, I think, if I open.
Hack Night.
Temp Hack. Oh, it's Hack Night and then Eonics Hack Night, right. Hack Night. Right, so let's try this. See if it works. It's really exciting. It should be fairly quick, I think. Oh, sorry?
So no jokes.
Yeah, I do still have more jokes, but I was hoping for... Sorry?
It means that you don't have time for a joke.
Exactly, yeah.
Well,
I
But
thought
maybe you're wrong.
maybe I was wrong. I thought it would be faster, but it's not.
Maybe it's busy in West Europe now.
Yeah,
There
that's what I expected. Doesn't look too good, so it's something went wrong. That's clear from the red. But yeah, if you want to know what went wrong, this is pretty hard to read. So what I usually do is I go to the Azure portal again. Yeah, so there's some kind of problem with our file. So if I go here and then to my new resource group. So I create this one. And then within the resource group you can go to settings and then deployments. There you should see the deployment. And you should also see that it failed. Then you can here see what the problem is. The parameter properties has an invalid value. So this is a little bit odd in Bicep. I wanted to show this just in case you encountered it. It's a little bit strange because the only thing that I need to do is it never showed this as a required property, but actually this thing is also required. It doesn't have to contain anything, but it must be present. Otherwise your deployment will fail. So, well, for purposes of demo now you know this. And I can deploy it again. And this time I should have time for a joke. Hopefully. Let's see, which one do we have? A man answers his door and finds a piano tuner waiting on the step. Can I help, says the man. I haven't ordered a piano tuner. I know you haven't, replies the piano tuner. Your neighbors did for you. So,
That one hurt a little bit.
a little bit, yeah, maybe. It's actually done. So if it succeeds, you get this kind of output. And we should now in the Azure portal also see a successful deployment. So if I close this and refresh this one, deployment has succeeded. And if I go to the overview, you also see that there is now an app service resource. And if you click at app service, you can also go here to browse. You can see what's running over there. Well, I did not deploy any code, so it just says, well, this. How is the food going, by the way? It's not been delivered yet?
It has been.
It has been. Then I think it will be good time to have our dinner, and then after the dinner we can do the workshop part.
No questions first.
Oh, you can ask questions if you have.
What's the advantage of using Bicep over using Terraform?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
You use Terraform though?
I have not used Terraform myself, no.
Okay.
No. So I wouldn't be able to tell. Well, maybe one advantage is that it's totally built into the Azure platform.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need any dependencies or licenses or whatever to use it. Just anywhere you have something related to Azure CLI is enough to use Bicep. So that I think will be an advantage. But I can imagine that Terraform probably has more features than Bicep.
Yeah, so Terraform you can also send it to like AWS and to...
Yeah, so indeed, if you already have Terraform, it may not make a lot of sense to move to Bicep. I'm not entirely sure how you define your infrastructure in Terraform. It probably also has some kind of YAML files, okay, yeah. So if you already have that, I wouldn't see an immediate reason to switch to Bicep. I think this is mostly interesting for people who don't have infrastructure as code yet, or who are using ARM files. But if you are already using Terraform, the advantages are not immediately clear to me.
Terraform is a separate product.
It's a separate product. I think you also have to pay for it.
Terraform is released by HashiCorp, I think.
Yeah, hash.
Yeah.
They also do Vagrant.
Yeah, so yeah, I didn't repeat the question for the viewers, but the question was, if you're already using Terraform, what are the advantages of Bicep? And personally, I'm not sure there are any, if I'm honest. Bicep is mostly interesting if you don't have such a tool yet. Yeah, more questions?
No?
Nope. Then
Thank
we will
you
have.
very much. Then thank you for now.
Yeah, you're welcome.
See you after a little food break.
Yes.